Hi, I'm Ed from CellarHand. I'm just here in the Yarra Valley on a beautiful spring day with Sandra de Pury. We are here on the Yeringberg hill on a north-east facing slope. Sandra, what's the grape variety surrounding us here?
So we're standing in the middle of the 4 rows of Roussanne. We have a total of 4 rows and we're right in the middle of it.
Roussanne has quite the history here at Yeringberg. How long have these vines been in the ground?
So these were planted in about 1980. So quite a long time ago now.
And whereabouts are the Marsanne vines?
So the Marsanne vines are a little bit further down the hill.
Mm-hmm.
They were planted a bit earlier than the Roussanne. So originally we just had a straight Marsanne, and then we got the very first Roussanne cuttings in Australia were planted here at Yerinberg in the 1980s.
Yeah, so and also it's a wine already with quite a history, I suppose, known by too many as the Yeringberg White, and they're quite an original thing. Obviously, it's not a world first because it has a very grand precedence in the Rhône Valley. But I don't think necessarily they're the first 2 grape varieties that sort of spring to mind when people think of the Yarra Valley. Fair to say.
Yeah, that's very true. I think the reason we have Marsanne is because my great-grandfather was famous for Marsanne back in the 1860s and 70s. So when my dad replanted the vineyard, Marsanne was an obvious choice to put in. And it's continued on since then. And we make a cool climate style of Marsanne Roussanne, quite different to the style you get from the warmer parts of Victoria and South Australia.
And when it comes to the blend, of course, I suppose it's hard to know where one begins and the other ends, as is the case really with any great blend, I think. But how do you see, well, let's start with Marsanne, and the one that was, I suppose, here first. How does that present itself in the vineyard and also in the wines that it makes? What does it contribute to the blend?
So the Marsanne in the vineyard, it's a bit of a vigorous weed. It will overcrop if you give it half a chance. Great big bunches. So we always have to thin that, not as much as we had to in the earlier years, but to get a balanced crop. The Marsanne to me is in some ways the workhorse of the blend. It gives the breadth, it gives more phenolics, gives kind of the deeper flavours of the blend, whereas the Roussanne, it's always more acid and it's more floral and it's got higher notes. I like to think of the Marsanne as being a horizontal wine in my mouth, and the Roussanne is the vertical wine in my mouth. Yeah.
So essentially you've got that sort of that richness, I suppose, and as you say, those sort of base notes in terms of flavours, and as you said, the more lifted aromatics and the drive of the wine. Yeah. It obviously is a wine that ages beautifully as well. Could you just describe from your point of view how it sort of evolved? So what are you looking for when you recognise Yeringberg Marsanne as a young Marsanne Roussanne as a young wine, and then through
as
the
an
ages?
Older wine. So when it's young, we release it after like 2 or 3 years after each vintage. So it's had a year in barrel and then a couple of years in bottle before it's released. But it's still tight and closed and in some ways quite shy and retiring, especially if it's chilled too much, then it doesn't really give a lot. It's much better at cellar temperature. As it ages, it develops a sort of sense of more richness, and obviously not more rich, but it gives that sense, and more kind of honeysuckle notes. It gets to be a darker colour. And becomes a really interesting wine after 5 or 6 years, but could go on for at least another 15.
Yeah, so essentially not what you call a fruity wine, but there are obviously fruit tones that you get in there, but also I suppose a lot of those sort of floral, almost honey notes with age, and almost sort of, I don't know, almost like tea, like botanical teas or whatever you might say. A little bit more. And it
also depends a lot on texture. I mean, it's a white wine that has phenolics, like it naturally has phenolics. We don't try and reduce that. In some ways, we encourage that by letting the grapes bronze in the vineyard. We de-stem everything and crush it before pressing. And so that's a really important part of the wine, is the texture of the wine as well, which is what makes it such a great food wine.
Yeah, and to me, it's kind of that. It's not entirely elusive, but I think that's what makes the wine so interesting, is that it's not overtly fruity, so it's got a little bit more sort of elusive notes in its, I suppose, flavour and aroma characteristics, but also it's a very sensual wine, and a lot of, I think, the pleasure of drinking it is that textural sense, but also the fact that you're kind of finding it as you go. And there's nothing obvious about it.
Yeah, that's right. You have to search for it, and you embark on that journey a little bit, and with the glass of wine, and keep on searching, and every mouthful you'll find another layer.
And we were talking earlier a little bit about the 2018 vintage of these wines. How was that for this particular blend?
It's a vintage. The 18 is a little bit more forward than it sometimes can be as a young wine. So the fruit characteristics are a little bit more pronounced in 18, which means it's really approachable now as a young wine.
Lovely. Look forward to trying that one again. Thank you.
Good.